April 8, 1943. 27,000 feet above Cannes, France. The engines of a dozen Focke-Wulf 198-5 fighters roared through the thin, freezing air. The sky was an endless blue ocean, streaked with contrails, the silent signatures of war. Inside the lead aircraft, Oberleutnant Ralph Hermican adjusted his oxygen mask. His gloved hands moved with the confidence of a man who'd done this 100 times. The altimeter needle trembled near the edge of the dial. His breath fogged the inside of his visor. Ralph was just 26. Yet already, he carried the weary calm of an old soldier, eyes sharp, but tired in a way that youth should never be. Below him, France stretched like a scarred painting, villages, forests, fields, and roads now turned into military corridors. Today's mission was simple on paper: intercept incoming Allied bombers heading for Rouen. But war never obeyed paper. The squadron flew in perfect formation. Each pilot watched the other's wings, maintaining the pattern with mechanical precision. Radio chatter crackled, coded words, clipped tones, the language of men who lived minute by minute. Ralph's second wingman, Lieutenant Karl Weiss, was only 22. He hummed a tune inside his mask, a nervous habit. No one heard him, but he said it calmed the fear. Ahead, the first silver specks appeared against the horizon. B-17s, the legendary flying fortresses. Hermican's jaw tightened. He'd faced them before. They were tough, unyielding, flying citadels with armor that chewed bullets and spat fire. He tapped his radio. Falk 1 to all units. Stay tight. We strike from the sun. The B-17s crawled across the sky like a wall of steel. Ralph could see their defensive gunners already moving, tiny black dots swiveling beneath glass bubbles. Falk 1, diving in. He pushed the stick forward. The nose dipped, and gravity surged through his body. The howl of wind became a scream as the fighters plunged toward the bombers. The German aircraft streaked out of the sun like daggers. Tracer rounds flared. The air erupted with flashing light, a deadly dance between speed and fire. Ralph's guns spat flame. He watched his tracers walk across a B-17's fuselage, tearing holes through the aluminum skin. Smoke burst from the wing. One engine caught fire. The bomber began to lag behind. But the return fire was brutal. Bullets shredded the air around him. A round smashed through his right wingtip, sending sparks across the canopy. Still, Ralph didn't flinch. He rolled left, looped under the formation, and climbed again. The sky was chaos now, black puffs of flak, white smoke trails, and falling metal. Within minutes, the airspace over Cannes became an inferno. Engines roared. Guns blazed. The blue heavens turned gray with smoke. Karl's voice cracked over the radio. "Ralph! My right engine's hit. I'm..." Static swallowed the rest. Ralph looked right, saw Karl's plane spiral out of formation, trailing fire. For a moment, the young pilot's canopy reflected sunlight like glass. Then, in a heartbeat, it vanished into cloud. Ralph's hand trembled, just for an instant. Then, discipline took over. "Stay focused," he muttered to himself. He banked sharply, tailing another B-17. This one was still intact, flying steady. He squeezed the trigger. The cannons thundered again. The bomber's rear gunner returned fire, tracer bullets slicing past Ralph's canopy. One hit close, shards of plexiglass sprayed across his shoulder. And then, silence. His left gun jammed. He cursed, slammed the gun housing, and climbed back into sunlight. Below him, two bombers felt slow, burning arcs trailing smoke into the French countryside. In the quiet between bursts of gunfire, something strange crept into Ralph's thoughts. Not fear. Not anger. Memory. He saw his mother standing in their Berlin courtyard, April 1939, waving as he left for flight school. Her face half lit by morning light. Back then, war had felt like destiny. Now, it just felt like survival. His father had fought in the Great War, the first one. He'd told Ralph stories of glory, honor, and comradeship. But those stories never mentioned what came after. The silence, the graves, the hunger. And now, Ralph was living through the sequel, a world on fire again, for reasons that felt more distant every day. He blinked, pulled himself back to the moment. A new formation of bombers approached. No time for ghosts. The American bombers opened up again, streams of fire pouring from their turrets. The German fighters scattered, weaving through the storm. Ralph dove low, then climbed beneath the formation, trying to strike from below where armor was weakest. His altimeter spun wildly. He fired again, a clean burst that shredded a bomber's tail. It began to spin, disintegrating midair. For a moment, Ralph watched parachutes bloom like flowers against the gray sky. And then another flash. A shell burst near his wing. The plane jolted violently. Smoke filled the cockpit. Alarms screamed. The engine coughed, stuttered, and began to fail. Ralph leveled the plane, struggling with the stick. Control response failing, he muttered. He looked down countryside below, a patchwork of fields and rivers. He was losing altitude fast. Ralph fought the controls, trying to coax life back into the engine. Oil pressure 0. Fuel line ruptured. Propeller slowing. He reached for the emergency lever, the bailout handle, and hesitated. Below, he could see the faint outlines of a village. Smoke already rising from burning wreckage. If he bailed now, he'd land somewhere between Allied and Resistance territory. Capture was likely. But if he stayed with the plane, he might not live to regret it. He made his choice. Ralph pulled the canopy release. Wind roared in. His oxygen mask tore free. He climbed onto the wing and jumped. The sky spun. For a moment, he saw his plane dive below, a black streak disappearing into the earth. Then the parachute snapped open. Silence again. Just the whisper of fabric and the sigh of wind. Ralph landed hard in a wheat field, the shock knocking the breath from his chest. His parachute tangled around him like a shroud. He tore it free, coughing, ears ringing from the explosion that followed, his plane hitting the earth a mile away. The smell of fuel and smoke drifted through the breeze. Somewhere nearby, a church bell tolled, slow, solemn, like a heartbeat. He staggered to his feet, dizzy, his flight jacket torn. His compass was gone. His radio, smashed. He was alone. For the first time since takeoff, he could hear the world again, birds, the distant rumble of artillery, and the quiet murmur of a village that had learned to live beneath war. April 8, 1943, the day the sky burned over France. Ralph crouched low as the echo of gunfire faded into the distance. The world around him was eerily quiet, fields rippling in the wind, a few scattered farmhouses on the horizon. For the first time, he could feel the weight of the earth under his boots, not steel, not machinery, but soil. He unhooked his parachute and buried it beneath loose dirt. The Luftwaffe insignia on his sleeve gleamed faintly under the sun. He covered it with mud. A soldier's instinct for survival. His mind replayed the last few minutes, the fire, the fall. Carl's voice cut off mid-sentence. He'd survived the sky, but now came the harder part, surviving the ground. Ralph began to walk slowly, cautiously, toward the nearest village. Every step felt like trespassing on another world. War in the air was fast, mechanical, deafening. But here, it was quiet, human, and heavy. He passed a cart abandoned on the roadside, its wheel broken. A farmhouse door swung open in the wind, creaking softly. Somewhere, a dog barked. Then silence. A woman watched him from a window, eyes sharp, unmoving. She didn't scream, didn't call for help. She just stared. He nodded slightly, a gesture not of threat, but of apology. She closed the shutters. The wind carried the distant sound of aircraft engines, again Allied bombers returning north. Ralph knew his mission had failed. The bombers would reach Rouen. Another city would burn tonight. By nightfall, Ralph found shelter in an abandoned barn. He stripped off his Luftwaffe jacket, hiding the insignia under straw. The exhaustion hit him like a wave. His hands trembled. The adrenaline was gone, all that remained was cold. He drifted in and out of sleep until the sound of footsteps woke him. A flashlight beam crossed his face. A voice whispered in French, "Don't move." Two men stepped closer. They weren't soldiers. Their clothes were worn, faces grim, resistance fighters. One held an old rifle. The other, a cigarette burning low between his fingers. "You're German," the man said quietly. Ralph didn't deny it. "Pilot. My plane's gone." They studied him, the enemy, unarmed, cold, half-dead in their barn. The man with the rifle finally lowered it. "You'll come with us." They took him to a farmhouse cellar. The walls were lined with sacks of grain and crates of ammunition. A woman in her 40s entered, sharp eyes, scarf tied around her hair. She looked at Ralph with both anger and pity. "Your bombers killed my brother," she said softly. "Why should I help you?" Ralph met her gaze. "Because I didn't come here to fight you. I came here to fly home." She stared at him for a long time. Then, finally, she said, "There's no home in this war. Only sides." They gave him water, a crust of bread, and a place to sit. For the next 2 days, the resistance debated what to do. Turn him over to the Allies? Execute him? Or use him for information? But Ralph had nothing to offer except his silence. He didn't beg, didn't plead. He simply sat waiting, thinking of the men he'd left behind in the sky. On the third morning, the woman returned. She placed a cup of coffee on the table and spoke quietly. "You will go south. There is a village near Falaise. If you reach the river, you can cross into the forest. Don't come back." Ralph looked up, uncertain if it was a trick. She met his eyes, calm, firm. "You're not the first pilot who's fallen from the sky. And you won't be the last." He nodded. "Thank you." As he stepped out, she added, "Tell your people the sky belongs to no one." Her words stayed with him for years. Ralph moved at dawn, following the dirt tracks southward. He crossed pastures, ducked beneath hedgerows, and waded through shallow streams. Once, a British reconnaissance plane passed overhead, its shadow gliding silently across the fields. He froze until it disappeared. By afternoon, he reached the river. The current was strong, the water cold. He stripped to his undershirt, sealed his maps in oilskin, and waded in. Halfway across, the current nearly pulled him under. He gasped, choking, but managed to drag himself onto the far bank, soaked and shivering. The forest ahead stretched endlessly, a sea of trees and fog. Somewhere beyond it, safety waited. Or maybe another kind of captivity. That night, Ralph found a campfire flickering in the woods. 2 figures sat beside it, Allied soldiers, separated from their unit. Their uniforms were muddy, faces gaunt. They turned as he approached, guns raised instantly. He raised his hands. "Don't shoot. I'm not armed." An American voice answered, suspicious, "You're Luftwaffe." "Yes," Ralph said quietly. "But I'm done fighting." The soldiers exchanged glances. One of them, a sergeant, lowered his rifle slightly. "You got a death wish, German?" "No," Ralph said. "Just tired of the sky." Something in his voice, the exhaustion, the honesty, disarmed them more than any surrender ever could. They let him sit by the fire. They shared their rations, cold beans, half a loaf of bread. For one night, enemies shared silence and warmth. No flags. No orders. Just men trying to survive the same war. At sunrise, Ralph awoke to find the soldiers gone. They had left food and a compass beside him. No note, no words, just quiet mercy. He looked toward the east, where the faint glow of morning rose behind the trees. He could follow it, reach the German lines again. Or keep walking west toward surrender, and perhaps freedom. He chose the latter. By afternoon, he emerged from the forest near a British forward post. When soldiers surrounded him, shouting, he raised his hands. "I am Oberleutnant Ralph Hermican, Luftwaffe pilot. I surrender." He expected hatred. Instead, the officer nodded once, motioning for him to be disarmed. War had already taken too much for anyone to waste more bullets. Months later, Ralph found himself thousands of miles away, not in Europe, but in Texas, at a prisoner of war camp near Amarillo. Rows of wooden barracks stretched under the burning sun. Guard towers watched silently from every corner. Here, war felt far away, but never gone. The prisoners were treated fairly, given food, books, and work. Yet for Ralph, captivity was not about fences, it was about memory. Every night, when the wind howled across the plains, he could almost hear the hum of engines again, the scream of the dive, the fire in the clouds. But he also heard something else now: laughter, music from the American camp nearby, the sound of a world still alive. He began sketching airplanes on scraps of paper, not weapons, but machines of beauty. Wings, engines, clouds. The parts of the sky that once belonged to him. Months turned into years. The war ended. Germany surrendered. The Reich that once promised eternity had fallen into ashes. One morning, Ralph received a letter through the Red Cross. It was from his mother. She had survived. Berlin was rubble, but she was alive. Her letter said only this: "You once flew above the clouds. Now, it is time to come home and walk among people again." He folded the letter carefully and placed it inside his jacket pocket. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to cry. In 1946, Ralph was finally repatriated. He returned to a homeland that barely resembled the one he'd left. Cities were broken, streets lined with ghosts of victory speeches long forgotten. He stepped off the train at Berlin's Tempelhof station, carrying only a small bag and the letter from his mother. She was waiting, older, thinner, but alive. They embraced quietly, saying little. There were no words for the years between them. In the years that followed, Ralph never flew again. He worked as a mechanic, fixing farm equipment, sometimes glancing skyward when a plane passed overhead. But he no longer thought of war. He thought of people, of Carl, of the resistance woman, of the American soldiers by the fire. All of them, fragments of a world that had nearly destroyed itself. Decades later, when historians asked surviving Luftwaffe pilots what they remembered most, Ralph gave a single answer: the silence after the fall. He never spoke of victories or medals. He spoke of smoke, of faces, of mercy in impossible places. Of the woman who let him go. Of the night when enemies shared bread beside a dying fire. And of the sound, the unbearable quiet, when the sky finally ran out of planes. His story became one of thousands, men caught between duty and humanity, between the heavens and the earth. April 8, 1943, the day Ralph Hermican's war in the sky ended, became, in his memory, not a tragedy, but a turning point. The day he stopped fighting for the Reich and started remembering what it meant to be human. History often remembers wars by their victors, by numbers, by flags. But behind each mission, each explosion, there were faces, men and women who lived through the silence between battles. Oberleutnant Ralph Hermican was one of them. A pilot who once ruled the air, and then learned to walk the earth again. The sky he once fought over still stretches above France, calm and endless. But somewhere, in that quiet blue, echoes remain. Of engines, of fire, of forgiveness.